so glad I was not the cause of it. I was like, oh no, did I cause this?
Not this time.
I think we all felt that way. I thought, oh my gosh, I don't even think.
I know. All right. I just want to, Elizabeth, can you see if, I'm not getting the participant thing up. Do we have, oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. That would be why.
Okay, I've got 12 people on.
Okay, so we should have folks back for the most part. I got to get back in that screen share. Lance, maybe you were giving the background on the survey and talking that that particular one you sent out was just for sort of local government stakeholders. So does that mean there's a different version for the main?
Everything is good. Thank you for barking at that. Good to see you too.
So if folks who haven't been asked by Ann to speak would please mute their speakers. So actually, I think that's a great timing of that question, Ann, because I see that since we crashed and rebuilt that Kate Vasquez with GBB and Rachel with their sub-consultant, I'm sorry, Rachel, I've forgotten the name of your company, have joined us. So the question is that the survey that I received and Phil McCaleb's and a few others who are on this call, which I forwarded to the group, was aimed at stakeholders. And Ann just asked the question whether that's the only survey, or so maybe you could talk a little bit about your surveying methodology, public engagement methodology for the Charlottesville landfill diversion study.
I'm happy to. Thank you, Lance. I'm assuming we all got kicked out based on what I was hearing when we came back in. It wasn't just us, huh?
No, you're in good company.
Good. And in answer to your question, I recognize a lot of the names that I'm seeing here. We are currently doing individual interviews with the stakeholders, as I heard Lance describing right before we all got kicked off. So I recognize some names because you've probably received emails from us requesting a time that we can interview with you. That is the first stage of this engagement, are these individual interviews, so that we can really have some open-ended, honest discussions as opposed to a simple survey with multiple choice answers. In follow-up to that, we will also have a community-based survey that will go to residents and likely a separate one to businesses within the city of Charlottesville. And that will be a much more quantitative, data-driven survey. Mm-hmm. So does that answer the question?
Sure, that's great. Do you have a sense of like how large a population you're going to try to reach, and just if you could give us a sense of perhaps how the questions for like citizens might vary compared to what you are asking sort of, city leaders and people who are pretty familiar with the inner workings of things.
Sure, happy to. Our original goal, and I would have to go back and check, but in my mind, it's 300 to 400 survey responses. Obviously, things have changed with the pandemic. Our goal had been to be there meeting with you all individually. We would have certainly liked to be in a room with all of you today or another day soon, having this sort of focus group discussion rather than Zoom. We also had hoped to be with neighborhood associations where we could join neighborhood members at a community gathering and have these conversations. So we have had to make some changes in how we do that. We still will be doing some focus groups. We'll pull together some groups and try to do this by Zoom, and with a little luck, maybe over the next couple of months, we'll be able to have some small focus group meetings. I don't foresee large community gatherings happening over the next couple of months. The way the questions will differ with the survey versus this, we'll be asking some more targeted questions about how residents feel about the services they're receiving. Are they easy to understand? Are they pleased with the services? Cost range questions, and also some specific questions about where they live. We'll use a map, not asking for anyone's specific address, but in what neighborhood do they live? And are they single family homes, or are they living in a fourplex or a 20-unit apartment building? Those kinds of questions.
Right. Great. Does anybody else have questions that they'd like to ask about the survey? Great. All right. Well, we were having this discussion sort of in light of, I'm very anxious to sort of benchmark, attitudes and recycling behavior in the county. That's sort of part of our, as an outreach and education subcommittee. We would, we want to have really well-educated citizens. We want to, sort of, to the degree that we can, create positive recycling behavior and help people understand, what is the right practice and so on and so forth. And so we don't really have a good sense of that today. We have a sense that people think recycling in the county is inadequate, but not much more than that. So I think that these surveys are very helpful for us to see how we might be able to do something. We also want to do it year over year because we want to be able to measure if we are having an influence on behavior and if our outreach is having an impact, because we'd like to report that out to the community. So any other thoughts on that that folks want to comment on before we move on just to the next topic?
I have a question. How does that begin to happen? How would one proceed to do a survey to gather that information?
I don't know, but I know, I think I'd like to get the information together that we would like to learn, that we think is important. I would like to make sure it aligns with whatever folks are doing, understand what information we're already collecting, and then understand the questions that we might want to learn on, related to climate and other things. I think I'd like to put that together. And then obviously there is a lot of logistical hurdles with being able to get it out into the county and do that. And that's where I would rely on Liz and Donna for their guidance on how we would do that or how we might manage that. But we'll just chunk it off and figure out how to tackle each hurdle at a time. I don't know, Liz and Donna, do you have thoughts on that right now you want to share?
I'm distracted a little bit about Terry is asking us questions about the survey, and I'm thinking she's asking the questions about the Charlottesville survey, but I'm not totally sure at this point since we've now started bringing in a county survey. So I guess I don't have thoughts for the county survey at this moment in time. I'm kind of focused on the city survey. I'm not sure I'm not sure we went past that, did we? Are we still talking about the city? And
no, we're talking about the county. And Carrie, do you not have access to audio?
So if you can hear me, like the call dropped, so I didn't get the intro, and I'm feeling rather lost. So I apologize for asking. I mean, I was inquiring when the survey of the city was going out. I've read the results of the county survey, and it had, that you shared in the email. Yeah, so I'm just trying to get caught up with this conversation.
Yeah, no problem. I think the city just contracted GBB to do this work for them, so I think it's in process. So I think they have started some of the surveys with key stakeholders like Phil and some other, local people, but the sort of citizen resident outreach, my sense is it hasn't begun yet, but Betsy, maybe
Gotcha.
you can, is there a time schedule for that?
Hi, this is Kate Vasquez, representing GBB today. I was thinking maybe I could jump in a little bit and answer some of those questions. So River District Consulting Group, Rachel's group, and has been working on these questions in conjunction with the city staff and with GBB folks too. These are, as Rachel was saying, these had originally been envisioned as questions that would be done face to face, and they're still going to be asked of people. This isn't a form that's completed. So what you're seeing is a working document, more like a script than a survey that is dispensed to people, because the intention always was that the conversations with stakeholders, individuals like yourselves who have self-identified as interested, participating in leadership, whether it's through your employment or your elected position or your personal engagement, your identified stakeholders in the process, and they always were intended to be conversations, and they still are going to be. It's just, as Rachel said, we had hoped they'd be like coffee chats instead of a Zoom call. But it's still very, very valid. But that's maybe part of the confusion is, or if there is confusion, that what you're seeing isn't something that's going to get mailed or emailed to somebody. It's not a secret, but it's not something they're going to receive and answer in a vacuum. And that's one of the big strengths that River District brings to the team, is working with people to engage them in a conversation like that and do that legwork on really getting people to think and talk about it and give so much more than just a yes, no, A, B, C, D, E answer to these questions. We know that you guys spend a lot of time thinking about this. Ms. Palmer, I believe we met several years ago with Harvey Gershman. So we know that you're engaged and you think about this more than the average person. And so we really want to dive into getting your perspectives and feedback on these systems as not only users of them, but engaged users. And we do have work going on both for the county and for the city, which when you guys are ready on your agenda, I'm prepared to talk to you guys a little bit about that. That's my slot for today, but I think that's what I'll go for with now, and I hope that maybe answers some questions about timing and intent of these questions.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that too, Kate? And this may be premature, but do you anticipate doing something similar for the work for the county, or is that scope not hashed out yet?
That scope is hashed out. And I think that, for example, what you folks, because you kind of serve both, when you're doing yours, it will inform their work too. The county government, as our client, is having a slightly different project. I'll discuss, I can jump to it now if you guys want.
Well, I'd like to hold that off. I'd like to talk about what you're going to be doing for the county. Let's wait. We've got quite a few more things I want to get through before we do that.
For sure.
So let's just push through a bit. So just quickly, we had talked about the governor's new plastic waste prevention board. Thank you, Teddy, for sending that along. I actually applied. It sounded like they didn't really want people with any background in the field, so I kind of doubt they would consider me. It was a little odd when I read they really want just a citizen. So I don't they didn't want anybody with any professional credentials in the field. I have this out here as a placeholder for our next call. I'll follow up with our subcommittee on whether that works for folks or not. And then I'm just going to turn it over now to Jesse about what's happened on the operations subcommittee in the last month.
Sure. If you could do me a favor, could you share the data display that Jeffrey sent to the SWAAC earlier today?
Ooh, I don't know if I have. Let me see if sure, I'll pull it up right now. Why don't you get started and we'll find it.
In other news, Jeffrey and I will talk about the data display in just a second, but we had a great meeting with River District, or I had a great meeting with River District. You know, after our last operations meeting, we spent most of the time going over the data display, but Lance put me in touch with that team and we worked through the document that you guys were just discussing. As described, it was sort of a 1-hour conversation. With me wearing primarily my UVA hat, but as you know, it's hard for me not to wear my SWAAC and Charlottesville resident hat from time to time. I'm looking to have an operations meeting later this month, but I haven't scheduled it yet for 2 reasons. The first reason is because Andy Lowe reached out to me to see if I would be willing to help with the climate action plan process again. And I think that would be sort of what we would pivot to after the data display was completed. I want to learn more about that before I start to bring anybody back together to discuss. And then the other thing I'd like to do is take a look at that data dashboard and then decide what we do with it. So did you find that email?
I didn't. I don't have that email. I just asked Jeffrey to send it to me to my email, so I'll pull it up as soon as I get it.
Okay, cool. So what Jeffrey and I did was take a look at the data provided by Phil on tonnage through IVMUC and McIntyre Recycling Center. We originally started with this idea that we could have a monthly snapshot of information and month-over-month numbers, and that became, I think, too convoluted for a public story. And so we settled on literally a story. When you get the document up, the document is not monthly, it's instead a quarterly snapshot that shares how much tonnage goes through those facilities, how many dollars that generates in terms of commodity value toward the local economy, how many MTCDE or metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent are saved as a result of those recycling activities, and then some equivalency for number of trees. Ah, there it is. So you can see we took this recycling dashboard and made it more of a storyboard than a graphical one. The first column is the story I just described. Together, we recovered 658 tons of recycling, which added $26,000 to the local economy, avoiding 1,400 MTCDE, which is the same amount of carbon sequestered by growing 23,000 trees. Jeffrey, would you like to explain this in more detail now that we've got it up?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeffrey. I'm an intern for Jesse Warren with the Office for Sustainability. Like Jesse said, we found, especially during our last review session, that some of the graphics were becoming perhaps a little more cumbersome than the story we were trying to tell. Phil provided this data to me, so thanks, Phil, for all the information and answering all my questions. The left column really is the meat and potatoes of this document. And the equivalents, the tree equivalent, as well as the MTCDE equivalent, I can provide the sources for those if anyone's curious. The MTCDE number came out of the Department of Energy's WARM tool, and the tree equivalent also came from the DOE's equivalency calculator. The recycling, the dollar amount of addition to the local economy, that's just based on market rates that were current. I believe I matched those market rates to the data that I'm using in this dashboard. But just note at the top, this is all 2019. So the numbers would change. However, I just focused on a quarterly lens. Again, this was also per our last review session, because if I remember correctly, Phil, maybe you can jump in here, but we were having issues with the data being a little too granular. The center of the graph, you'll see we've got food scraps and generation of compost. This is really just to kind of reinforce the positive association between food scraps and composting. What's not included here, of course, at least not included directly in this graphic, is the emissions associated with food scraps in landfill. But that number is factored into that 1,400 metric tons in the first column. Last, we've got our materials mix, pretty self-explanatory. You can see it's just a breakdown again for the same interval we're talking about here, this April through June 2019 data. And finally, what's on the far right column, that should be expected to change. It would be a message board. I'm going in a little extra detail if there are people here who haven't seen this graphic or weren't at the last meeting, that is. But again, this far right column, its purpose is to be a message board for upcoming events. Yeah, happy to answer any questions, but that's the graph.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I love it. It is awesome to start to display things in an accessible way. Just thank you very much. And I think the question is, do we think this is right? I mean, I know that people, the communications, the county communications people are probably going to want to touch this and change things. But
well, that kind of brings us. Do you mind? That kind of brings us to us talk with a conversation we had in our subcommittee meeting, which is who is the owner of this and who is the audience of this? And we had some ideas about different ways it could be displayed. What I would offer is this. We, the operations group, have taken the data we think we have and we've visualized it as best as we think we can. Would the outreach, communication, and education subcommittee be willing to run with how we get this word out, whether it's a sign at McIntyre, or if it's a website, or if it's a dashboard? I guess it feels like it rolls into y'all's wheelhouse.
yeah, it does. And what I wanted to say is, what I'd like to have the quarterly stuff and then have the annuals, because then we can benchmark how we do year over year. So I'm wondering, if we do this for the next quarter, is this hard to do, by the way, to generate this?
Sure, it's not, it's a little tedious because right now I'm creating this as a one-off, but I've also been putting some time into making a version that can be, put it this way, I'm working on a version where you have an Excel sheet with input fields and a PowerPoint which produces this visual. So my goal is to make it more streamlined in the future. But right now, it's not terribly tedious now.
May I ask a
I was
quick
going to say
question?
the answer, Jesse, is yes. I think our subcommittee can take that, and I think of the outlets you said, I think it can go to all of the above. I think there's going to be some questions like, to me, this is Q2 results. Like, I'd love to get Q1 results. I don't know if we can get Q1 results. So we could sort of show Q1, Q2, and then at the end of the year, we would have the whole year together.
And that was kind of our conversation about audience, right? Because Lance as a board member and Liz as a board member probably want more sophisticated detail. Whereas the public wants something that is educational and consumable.
Right. And to me, this is for the public. This isn't for the board so much.
Agreed. And so all the year over year, month over month, we ended up taking out because we felt it was hard to communicate that to people other than experts in the field.
I can say, one thing I would like to do, if you haven't already done that, Jesse, and I don't think I saw it in the email, and Jeffrey, could you send, I know you went over where you got the numbers, but I would just like to make sure I understand where you got the local economy numbers a little bit better. If you could just send that out to us, I'd appreciate it. I would want to just make sure how,
Yeah,
He's going to be
agreed.
challenged to that kind of stuff. And other than that, I love it. I think it's perfect for communicating with the public and communicating the importance of, sustainable material management with our climate action plan. So I'm thrilled with it. I just want to make sure I can defend these numbers.
And that's
I think
important
there
to
needs
us
to be a
too.
citation on the data source and then what tools were used.
So
But I have a
why
question,
don't Jeff?
Jesse, about why year over year? Because what I envisioned on the website was just something like, on an annual basis, Albemarle County, recovered X tons with this value. It would just be an annual summary.
Yeah, and it could take the same format as this. We started out with a series of charts showing what was up, what was down. It started to look like a stock page.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of it as being this, but I think it's at some point we would want to show 2020, 2021, so people could look at, as we benchmark what we're doing, we can, I think, look at it year over year. I think the net tons is, we sort of have learned from data that it's the per cap data is really important. And so I think there's some element of this we have to look at, whether it's the people who participate or whether it's total county, that really lets us understand what it's going to have to be the number of people who participate in the drop-off program. It's going to be the only fair way to do it.
We ended up in the exact same place. And so we started dividing tons per customer and things like that. But that ultimately just told us how infrequently they went. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's good to look at. But that's where, I think that's the kind of, we have to put that mirror up to the county. Because when they talk about recycling being inadequate in the county, when we only have subscription option for the rest of it outside of this, that's your choice, right? And we don't have any data on what happens in subscription.
So this was really about celebrating the source separation. And we took out the word source separation, but this is really about celebrating McIntyre and Ivy. Yeah. And congratulating those customers for doing a great job and the best they can. Yeah. It's less about per capita or what's our recycling rate, because we just don't have a comprehensive picture of those metrics across our area. Right.
I think that raises a major issue in the county, which is that we only have 2 places where you can do this. And, I live out in the middle of nowhere, but because I go to the county office building regularly, which is very close to McIntyre, I bring a load in at least every week. But for most of the people who live in the rural areas, they don't. And so we have so much potential recycling that is being lost because we do not have additional convenience centers. And that's something that Liz and I are very, very interested in increasing. Unfortunately, now with the pandemic and the economic impact of it, the likelihood of anything new happening in the foreseeable future, I think, is not very positive. But for most of the people who live out in these rural areas, at most they have their garbage picked up. And a number of people I know, they have burn pits in their yards, which are not authorized. They're against the ordinance, but it's the reality. And unless we can improve the accessibility of drop-off points, we are going to continue to miss huge quantities of potentially recyclable material.
So I think that is, as we develop the communication strategy about how to use this information, Jesse, I think this is because we want to emphasize the point that Donna just made. And that, I think ultimately we want to highlight that gap in service to many people in the county and what the potential is if we fill that gap. And we know that there is a response from that county survey that people see that as a deficit. So that's a long conversation to have and figure out how to do, especially in light of the impacts of COVID. But so I think there are 2 cuts of this data. One is to really celebrate what is happening at McIntyre and Ivy. and then I think there's a slightly more sophisticated conversation around what's next and how do we do better, which is that more detailed slice of the data, and really highlighting the lack of information we have and the lack of access to convenient recycling that many Albemarle County citizens have.
Right.
So I think that's a rich conversation that we have to continue. But I think this is great. Thank you so much.
So what we will do is we will cite extensively where these numbers come from. We will clean up the documents. We will share it with the group. I will also schedule an ops meeting for later in the month with the focus of a renewed interest in the climate action planning process.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then you will have a meeting this month, it sounds like.
Yes, and then depending on what Terry chooses as subcommittee assignments, we can discuss the public nature of Zoom calls.
Okay. Teddy, can we roll over to you?
Sure. Well, planning has was pretty hard hit by COVID, right?
Yep.
That sidelined all great plans. But Peggy has been working on a legislative update. Our committee will be meeting this month. We will probably, you know how we always say what we're going to do for the forthcoming 6 months. So we need to look at that and make some revisions so that we can actually move forward. And we may be looking at, you know, lengthening the timeline for some things. COVID isn't going to last forever. And there's no reason, I guess, not to plan, you know, recognizing that we may have some, you know, up to say an 18-month delay on some activities due to their very nature. But other than that, you know, us kind of trying to figure out how we're going to instigate planning in a new timeline will be our focus this coming week. I'm going to leave it to Peggy to give the rest of the update.
Yeah, I don't know if we really have time to do a review of the legislative program that occurred this past session in Richmond right now. I will say that one thing that was interesting that was signed into law by Governor Northam was the bag tax for plastic bags of 5 cents. Any county or city is now authorized to implement a bag tax on plastic bags, where 1 penny would go to the retailer and the 4 cents remaining would go to the locality and could be used for cleanups or for providing reusable bags to residents. So I can talk more about that next time, but obviously, you know, there would need to be a plan for that. We would want to talk with the city about that. As we all know, Washington, D.C. implemented a program like that in 2010 that included both plastic and paper bags. And it's been very, very effective at reducing the number of plastic bags that they find in their rivers and streets and parks, and has seemed to work well for them. But
I just listened to a webinar about that today, and Boulder is looking at a slightly different approach, and then the state of Vermont was commenting about theirs, which was influenced by the DC ban. But DC uses the revenue from their bag tax to support installation of litter traps and the maintenance of them, as well as some other activities. It was pretty interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will make sure that we set aside a little bit more time on our next call for you guys to maybe give an update on that sort of stuff, Peggy.
Yeah, great. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and we don't have time this meeting, but if we could put on the agenda just a brief discussion of the climate action plan and the interacting with the county schools.
Sure.
and getting their participation if possible, because Lindsay Snoddy used to be a liaison on our committee, and she's a very busy person, and I don't know, she sort of dropped off, but we should be working with the county schools to see what we can do to help them reduce their waste that they're generating.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Teddy, do you think you'll be having a meeting this month?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Did somebody else have a comment?
Yeah, I just had a quick thing real quick. It's related, but not directly SWAAC, but it seems planning and vision related. So I know next Tuesday we're having a climate subcommittee meeting for soil and water. And one of the things we're looking at is trying to get some healthy soils legislation maybe drafted, or at least some bullet points to maybe look at seeing what we might be able to do with that respect. So I'll try to keep people updated with what we find out there, because that would definitely tie into at least some composting and other things. Because our district manager came from California, where they're doing, for anyone who wasn't on that call earlier this year, they're doing a lot of directing compost from their municipalities out into their farmland there to help build up the soil and also kind of close their waste stream back into their food, because there's all the food people are eating and then the waste doesn't necessarily get back to restore the carbon to the soil. So that seems at least tangentially related to what we're doing here. But I was just letting everyone know that that's coming up soon, next Tuesday.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could send out the date.
Yeah, I'll look, and I think there'll be enough people meeting. It might be a public meeting. So if so, I'll send the public meeting link.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks. Lance, I don't know if you have anything you want to share. I am cognizant of we're eating into the time we had allocated for a GBB, but I know we had we kind of got off track on my thing earlier. Is there anything that you want to share quickly?
Actually, everything that I thought I had to share, I shared via an email earlier. I think earlier this week to the group, saying, introducing the fact that GBB would be here today to talk with SWAAC as a stakeholder for the landfill diversion study. And that also we had just days ago finalized our contract with them for the Albemarle County study. So, I'd hate to put them on the spot for the latter half of that, although if you want to put them on the spot, that's your call. We have our initial true kickoff meeting scheduled for next week. But I just want to happy that Kate and Rachel were able to work it into their schedule to be here to talk with you all about, the county's perspective, SWAAC's perspective on the Charlottesville study. And I had suggested a couple of ways they might tackle that. So I'll just turn that over to Kate and Rachel at this point.
Okay. Just can I ask you guys to hold for 1 second so I'm going to just run through the last business. I'm going to turn the meeting over to you guys, if you don't mind. Just quickly on Christine, I know you were going to check in with Amy Laufer to see if she was still interested in the SWAAC position. Is that?
Yeah, and I just did not hear back from her. I kind of contacted her a little bit late, but.
All right, we'll put that as a pending.
I hadn't heard back from her from our last meeting, and then I followed up and I hadn't heard back. Okay.
The other thing is, Teddy reminded me, is it's that time of year again where we have to discuss the SWAAC chairman, vice chairman, and secretary positions. I because we missed a month, I think we can roll into next month because I want to make sure we take advantage of having GBB. So if you all don't mind, let's move that discussion till next month. So think hard if you're really interested in one of those positions. And then Terry, I wanted to follow up with you about your subcommittee assignment. So I have to do a little bit of orientation with you. Please don't feel bad about feeling a bit lost because you have not had a SWAAC committee orientation. So I will have maybe when we have coffee, we can go through some of that. But as you know, we have 3 subcommittees, and I would like every voting SWAAC member to be on a subcommittee. I know that Jesse's committee right now is sort of down a person, so I don't know if you're interested in that operations committee. But it's up to you. We can have that discussion. If there are other people who are interested in maybe shifting, we can do that as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the agenda and then just turn it over to GBB now. And so thank you. And please take it over, guys.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to click share my screen and see what comes up. I've been on several Zoom calls, but I haven't been a presenter yet. So if you'll just bear with me a second. Oh, good. I can select which screen I want to share. Great. It's a lot like Teams. Okay. Do you all see my first slide there that says landfill diversion and prioritizing services?
Yep.
Okay, and you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like I'm looking at you. I have a 2 screen set up, so. Okay, then I think I'm ready to start. So thank you for having us. We're happy to be here and working with you all. My name is Kate Vasquez. As I said, I'm working with Gershwin, Berkner, and Bratton and our partner, who I should have featured on this slide. I apologize. River District Consulting Group, Rachel and Holly. And we wanted to just have a minute to talk with you. I've met a couple of you in person in the past. Glad to be back with you. Love working in the region. Love working in Virginia, of course, not only because it's local, but because we have just a great community in this Commonwealth, I think, where we have a lot of people who are engaged and we have a lot of policy and information that it can give us action in this area and continue to be a leader in the field of solid waste management. I have a very short number of slides to show you this evening. It just helps me organize my thoughts and keep us on track. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the scope of work that we're doing for the city of Charlottesville and the scope of work that we're doing for Albemarle County. I kind of alluded a few minutes ago that they can work at the same time and benefit one another, which is I'll also talk about how the projects support each other. And but they are a slightly different tack as far as what kind of assignment it is. And then we'll talk a little bit about how this work is literally going to kind of have a workflow that's going on at the same time. I apologize if this is tiny. I'm happy to share these slides with you guys afterwards so that you can enjoy them a little more closely, but I'll kind of just hit the highlights for you. The Charlottesville scope is to evaluate the current planning and programs against the stated goals and ambitions of the solid waste management plan. There are some specific charges such as identifying people who are in the gap for solid waste management programs. What kind of things are they looking for that they're not getting? And to a degree that will include small businesses too, because small businesses are currently an actual client of the city, but they're also a big source of a lot of material for the city. Also, what kind of materials are out there available for recovery that aren't getting recovered? And what are some of the opportunities that we have for achieving more diversion from landfill, but also considering what the impacts are on both the city and on ratepayers or participants in the system. Going down here to avoid reading this slide to you, the work will continue as we gather information from the stakeholders. That's a lot of what River District is doing. And Rachel's going to talk to you guys, I think, about that a little bit more. Getting information from stakeholders and program participants about how they kind of feel about the program now. You have a in the city, they have a pay-as-you-throw approach, for example. And then looking at how can we create from a set of recommendations, some recommendations for what the city can offer that will best meet its needs, both its needs for climate action, its needs for waste reduction, its needs for providing what residents want, and its needs to meet its financial responsibilities. So that's why you see these bullets, which these are fleshed out in much greater detail in our assignment. I just didn't want to kind of get into the weeds on this, but we'll be looking at programs, operations, finances, and policies and customer service. You know, what's the experience of people who are participating in the program? We'll be looking then to describe how the programs could help and impact people. And this is really important. And this is something that I think is crucially important with these assignments. And it's not that it isn't important to in every town, but the city is very aware of the people who participate in these programs. There are a lot of people who have as a value that this is important to them. And then there are also varying means available for these programs from different sources, but it is a stated value in several different arenas in the city. As I've been assembling some of the background work, it's in the comp plan, it's in the solid waste management plan, it's in the land use plan, it's in the Green City Declaration. So this is clearly a strong value. So then we're going to talk about how that all works together, and then identify recommended program updates and discuss how participation in them might financially impact the city. The city currently pays a lot of the expenses, even though there's pay-as-you-throw, there's a lot that's paid out of other funding sources. So what would be the impact if they were going to do X or Y or Z? And I'm kind of skimming over here and not meaning to, but we have two really great partners on this program also. One is River District doing this really great work with people on the stakeholders and the survey work and the focus groups. And then also a firm called C2 Logics. They are a computerized routing firm. And when I tell you we're going to estimate what the financial ramifications of some programs would be, one of the biggest ways you know how much a collection program, for example, and the city is a lot interested in what can or should be provided at the curb and how is it provided at the curb, you have to know some costs behind that, because in any kind of collection program, 2/3 of the cost roughly and generally is in the actual collection. And so what C2 Logics can do is take some inputs such as how many pounds per household are we looking at for recyclables, or how many pounds per household might get set out if we had a food waste composting program. And I should caveat, those are all completely theoretical, everything's on the table. But if we were going to have a curbside food waste collection program, well, how much material might we be looking at? How many households could we expect to participate there? How does that translate into truck miles, road miles, gallons of fuel, hours of labor, et cetera? Their software can calculate all of that. And that's where we get some of these estimates for how much it might actually cost. So in the end, we'll be looking at identifying recommendations, like I said, for programs that meet the needs and including in all those discussions how much it might cost. Now the county scope, because the county presently does not have the level of service provision that the city does, it's a little bit less of a review, comment, and recommend project than the one in the city is. And the county had asked us to arrange the work into some steps that can be completed and almost stand alone, even though they build up to a completed project, so that they can decide as they're going to advance the effort. So right now we're just about to kick off, as Lance said, we're just about to kick off step one. And step one is an undertaking to identify a vision for solid waste management in Albemarle County. Now, a lot of times, vision is a phrase that organizations use frequently. So what we're talking about here, though, is this is not something that gets put on a plaque or put into a brochure or something. This is an idea. It is a literal vision for what would an excellent solid waste management program in Albemarle County look like. It is going to be very entrenched in the experience for participants and what do they need, expect, and deserve, and how does that integrate with the intentions, efforts, and outlook for the county. It's to work together and explore what the experience would be like, and to look at what it would include in the near, mid, and long term. So some participants in that, you see some titles listed here, but there's also, there is a role for stakeholders. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on my next slide. But the output of this would be, for example, again, completely theoretical. One of them might be, our vision for Albemarle County is that everyone who lives in the urban suburban ring has curbside collection of waste and recyclables. So how do we accomplish that? That's what we'll get to. But is that the vision? Is the vision for every X number of people, there's a staff drop-off center for these materials? These are the things we're going to work through, and some of them might be, for example, by next year, we want that curbside recycling thing. Within 5 years, we want the drop-off center thing, because it takes time to site and build drop-off centers. So that's kind of what the output of the step one is going to look like. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I don't forget something. That will be a memorandum describing that vision. That'll be the output of that. Now the steps going forward, the next would be like, okay, well, what's missing between what we have now and our vision? And for example, you see a question there, where are the people who want service but cannot get it conveniently or readily? What waste streams are available for recovery but are being discarded? Now you can kind of see how the data gathering and research, which I'm going to talk about on the very next slide, I'm going to put a finer point on it. This is how the two things are kind of happening at the same time. It's basically kind of a given that if you do research on that kind of topic for the city, you're going to learn what you need to know for the county at the same time, or you can do them at the same time because they're so enmeshed. Step 3 and 4 would be kind of similar. And one is to create case studies and recommendations for filling the gaps that we talk about in step 2. And then step 4 is case studies and recommendations for how these enhancements can be part of the climate action. Our understanding, and I've absolutely heard it reflected in your words in this meeting this evening, are that this is a very important value for Albemarle County climate action. And so we want to make sure that we look at best practices and activities from comparable communities for filling service gaps and for taking climate action through solid waste. And then finally, step 5 would be to select from the best practices some recommended recommendations for Albemarle County. Now, whereas the final output for the city of Charlottesville is going to be sort of okay, now let's start implementing these programs and things. The output for Albemarle County is going to be more like plan elements that can be integrated into some of the already existing plans. There'll be 5 to 8 of them, And the plan elements that are created will include goals, objectives, actions, possible financial impacts. That's slightly different. Remember, we talked about Charlottesville is going to have these seconds per stop and cost per pound and gallons of fuel. Some intended outcomes of the plan elements, possible required resources, the urgency for them, and how quickly or in what kind of time frame they could be achieved. Remember, I talked about things that could be maybe achieved within 1 year and then things that take 5 years. And these are the kind of things that then can be sort of incorporated by reference to existing guidance documents. Because like I said, we're aware that there are already several different kind of plans in place that are working in Albemarle. And so that's how this assignment is a little bit different than the cities. So I've kind of been alluding to how the projects support each other. And if you start there on the left, you can see it starts with the research. There are, of course, overlapping audiences. Then this is also, this is illustrated by the fact that the day and night populations of residents across the two go back and forth. So we might have, we might have a small business customer in the city who lives in the county, or vice versa. And so we've got a lot of overlap on customer type, experience, desire, things like that. Even actual userhood, where people are using both systems. And then there are a lot of shared values, and there are a lot of shared comparable communities. When it comes to actual effort and our efforts as the consultants, we'll have some benefits for both teams. For example, we can, if we have some in-person visits, which we may still have, there'll be combined trips, or we can have combined calls. And we'll also have this shared frame of information. And I kind of talked about this on the previous slide. When you're doing research about one, it's kind of like having one more person for dinner. Yes, come on, that's not a problem at all. And so we can kind of have this shared frame of information, and even the knowledge base that GBB is drawing on, both clients get to benefit from as the more the information builds and the more we learn about costs in the region, labor, facilities, the more we learn about it, it's good for both projects. And then the last thing is that the result for both clients and both projects is going to be great for everyone in the region when both have a tool to help them provide optimum access across the region. And I know your city and county don't constitute the entirety of your region, but when I'm saying that to mean the city and the county. So the people who are going back and forth between both, either daily or from time to time, it will provide optimum access to landfill diversion, regardless of where they are. And then just really briefly, how the work is going to flow simultaneously. Starting there at the present, right now, Charlottesville, we're currently doing stakeholder input, which Rachel's team has been working on, and we're also assembling and reviewing the information that they provided us about their programs and starting the analysis on it. And at the same time, Albemarle is about to kick off soon, and their stakeholder research will begin, where we're drawing on some of this, what's relevant to the county in this. The next thing that will start to happen in August and a little after, Charlottesville is going to move forward to developing recommendations and evaluating impacts. At the same time, Albemarle starts describing their vision. As appropriate, GBB can draw on our knowledge of the work from each client to assist the other. And as we said, there is, of course, some stakeholder overlap. So each project can actually cite each other's learning in the development of their work products. I had another little hypothetical example. Let's say Albemarle wants to be able to facilitate all residents in the suburban area having affordable and universal access to curbside collection, like I said, but it has no existing governmental function for doing so. And let's say at the same time, Charlottesville decides they want to re-procure their curbside services so they can change the way they do it. GBB can learn if both parties are interested in and open to working together on procurement and curbside services. Like I said, these are completely theoretical. This is just a sample example. That kind of thing could result in savings for all with a larger customer base, but it also requires consolidations of some administrative functions. It requires memoranda. Is it going to be through the authority or what? But this is the kind of thing, if let's say there is interest in agreement, that can be written into both products. Or let's say we start looking into, we're like, I don't think it's gonna, there's a lot of problems. I don't know what it is, but okay, then we know that too. So that's how the knowledge base benefits both projects going on at the same time. And then our beyond is beyond, the immediate future of the project later into the fall and winter. Charlottesville will be in the process of developing their impacts and their other recommendations, and the county can cite the potential list discussed in the Charlottesville work is being supportive of their vision and vice versa. A lot of what will be published here is public facing and elected facing. And when that is the case, it's always going to have examples of what commonly referenced comparable communities are doing. That's all I prepared for my slides. I hope that kind of gives you guys an idea of what the projects themselves are doing. And I can answer questions now, or we can let Rachel, she has a few things that she was asked to discuss. We can let her continue, and then you guys can ask questions at the end.
Can I make just a quick 2 comments really quick on yours, Kate?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that you have access to this committee's solid waste management plan that was published in 2015, I believe. So yes, I want to make sure of that. And just an FYI, the hypothetical you used under next has been discussed in this community, and I'll be quiet now.
Yes, ma'am, I do have that, and we know it's not new news. It was an easy example to describe, and I hope I did not oversimplify in the interest of efficiency. Definitely not my intent. Thank you for that.
Kate, I just had a quick question, and I'm sure this will come up in some of the stakeholder surveys, but I think one of the things that this committee has been looking into is how well does the regional sort of MRF infrastructure support any objectives we might have in terms of recycling. We know our organics infrastructure is stronger, even though we don't have much of a countywide program, but our recycling infrastructure is really weak. And was wondering, is that an area that you're going to evaluate at all? Oops. Did I come across or not?
I was just trying to turn my presentation off for a second. I couldn't see you all. It was still on my screen. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I had a distraction. Could you please repeat the question?
I'm just wondering if, so like if the county comes up with a vision, we could come up with a vision that we wanted curbside recycling, but, I think one of the things we've identified is that our regional MRF infrastructure is pretty poor. And that even though we might have that vision, really being able to come through on the promise of recycling to our community might not actually be realized given that existing infrastructure. And I'm wondering to what degree are you going to dig into that issue, and especially in light of comparable communities that might have access to MRFs, and much better access to MRFs, either in a competitive way or just, distance-wise.
Right. Okay, so that is definitely always a consideration to take, whether there's a market for whatever it is that you're wanting to collect. And we've been working actually working in Central Virginia over the past year also, working for CVWMA, and are aware, of course, even from our initial work from the city, that there's been a lot of change in the ability to get materials to market in this region. And then, of course, worldwide, a lot of things have changed. Now, the recent evolution also with concerns about public health are also on our radar, of course, and we're continuing to learn and read everything we can about that. any kind of recommendation for a material to be generated and diverted, especially when, like most of Virginia, where we have such ready and cheap access to landfill, has to be considered. And that is definitely a component of the feasibility analysis of any of the recommended programs. We can, we could talk all day to residents and have so many people super interested in food waste diversion, for example, but if there's nowhere to take it, there's nowhere to take it. So we would have to include that in all of our analysis for sure.
Well, I'll just be very specific. We went and reviewed the MRF, and they just flat out told us they're still collecting materials. They tell consumers to put in the single stream, but they're in fact landfilling them, and that's not disclosed to citizens. And I'm not certain that we would be comfortable with that. So I think those are some of the things that we've identified, and I'm sure will come out in the survey. But I think that infrastructure deficit is a really big one for our community in particular.
You're talking about the county waste MRF.
Yep.
We are aware of issues with them in similar instances, not only there.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we left some unanswered questions about the survey stuff too, so please feel free. I know we're over time, but I think we're just so lucky to have you all. I want to make sure that any questions people have, we get answered. So I would just ask people to be, if you can, give us a little bit more of your time so we can get through any questions there are. So Rachel, I know we kind of cut you off midstream, so feel free to to continue about what you were going to do for the county.
Quite all right, and I apologize. I was trying to unmute myself earlier when there were some questions and it just wasn't happening. So Kate jumped in and I appreciate that. We at River District Consulting, and my business partner Holly Adams is on here somewhere taking some notes for us. We are not specifically involved, there's Holly, we're not specifically involved in the county project with GBB. We are subcontracted for the city project. But as Kate said, I think we can all see how they very easily overlap, and so much of the research and the stakeholder input that we receive for the city project will, I believe, be beneficial for the county project as well. And I want to be very cognizant of your time. I realize your meeting ended 13 minutes ago, and I apologize for that, but we do have a couple of questions we'd like to ask. This is a real opportunity for us, and thank you, Lance, for arranging it for us to be in the room, if you will, with real thought leaders in the industry. Oh, look at the cat. In the industry and in your region. So we would not want to go through with you today that entire script that you saw in the interview questions that we were showing earlier. Those will be used with individual conversations. And as you know, we've met with Phil and Lance and Jesse. We're meeting with Liz tomorrow. And there are other names I recognize here on the list. I know Terry, you're on the list, and Sharice, and I recognize a lot of names that we've seen over the last month or so. So if you've not heard from us already, you probably will. And we'll take about an hour really digging into those questions. But for today, we want to talk about collaboration. You all have this amazing synergy there where you have the city, you have the county, you have Ravenna, and you have the university, all doing overlapping work and looking at ways that maybe you can collaborate. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. If you can give us another 7 to 8 minutes, because we'd like your feedback on this. Holly is taking notes, so it would be helpful if just one person speaks at a time, which I know is not always easy. We will have the recording so we can go back and look at that later. But I have 3 prompting questions, and we really just want your honest feedback, suggestions, recommendations. And I can share my screen, I think. I know some people are more visual. So I don't know if can you see these questions here?
Yes.
All right. The first one is in your opinion, what are the compelling opportunities for collaboration that GBB should consider as we conduct the Charlottesville study and also the county study? What are our opportunities for collaboration?
Jesse and Phil, do you guys want to start?
If they don't, I will.
Yeah, I've already had my piece, so go for it.
Well, I have my piece tomorrow, but I think one of the biggest things is for the city to start sending their trash that's collected curbside over to Ivy. And this can participate, I think, in sort of separated collection opportunities more widely. I think in the long run, we'll reach our goals more quickly for climate change, and we will probably all end up with a lower cost in the long run. And I hope that the city will be looking at that pretty carefully and considering the long term and what the costs may be long term and the benefits. That's my big thing. I want to bring them back into the fold. I was around in 2005-06 when GBB worked on the community solid waste plan with the city and the county that never got approved because the city and the county just couldn't quite get together on this at that particular time for a variety of reasons. And so I'd like to get us all back on the same page.
Phil, is there anything in particular you'd like to say?
No.
Okay. I'll weigh in on one thing, which is that there's a lot of city-county participation at McIntyre, and particularly today with the focus on quality and recyclables, our drop-off program is really a best-in-practice type of program, and it needs more support, and in particular, we need more space and area to bale our material. And there are things we would like to do, we'd like to include, but we can't because we have a real challenge at the location where materials are aggregated and baled. And I think there's a real shared interest to try to optimize that program because there is such collaboration across the community in that. And I know one thing is, I'm always interested in waste composition. So, I think if there was going to be any detailed waste composition study done with the hauler that serves Charlottesville, to the degree that that could be extended into, that hauler also serves many parts of Albemarle County, it would be great to just extend it.
I will, are you done, Anne?
Yes, go ahead, Terry.
I will say that I think there's a huge opportunity to work with restaurants. We're running the Better Business Challenge, which is a friendly green business competition for the fourth time this year. And we don't have as many restaurants involved this year, and COVID kind of halted some of our recruitment efforts. So there could be more restaurants involved, but there's been as much as 30% of the businesses were restaurant related. And what we hear from them is a lot of barriers in terms of space, in terms of siting, in terms of how often pickups can happen, et cetera, in terms of their organics. But what we do hear from both the front end and the back end, from restaurant owners and from consumers, that they would really like to see a solution. And I'm thinking of Patrick McClure, who owns Citizen Burger, Citizen Bowl, and he's got compostable products, and the front of the house, the consumer sees the compostables, but there's actually not compostable options. As you mentioned, the infrastructure is not there. So, you know, they cite space barriers, you know, like, you know, sometimes the training of the staff, but I think that I actually would be willing to consider that if there were the infrastructure. So I think that the food, we are a self-proclaimed foodie town. I think that's actually backed up by per capita of how many restaurants are here. So that's, and the restaurant owners, they know that there's a lot of waste, and it does, it's definitely perceptible. They know that that's a problem in their industry.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any specific opportunities you think should be considered?
And I just add that this idea that we've got Panorama Farm who's expanding their composting, and also Black Bear. So I feel like there are opportunities for to improve and to expand composting.
Yep, and I third that too with organics diversion. I think there's great opportunity for collaboration as well as education on you know, waste reduction, reuse, recycling, you know, all of solid waste management. I think there are huge opportunities too between the city, the county, and UVA for education efforts.
Not only organics diversion or food waste diversion, but the aligned education across those different entities would be really helpful, making sure that we're educating off the same songbook.
Exactly. Yes, with the education, I meant bigger picture, not just organics, but yes, big, all the way around. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, Anne.
And more involvement in with the schools.
Yeah, that's a big deficit.
I kind of like to suggest that let's think a little bit bigger and talk about the possibility of a jointly owned city-county MRF, and you know, maybe mandatory collection and recycling for not the entire county necessarily, but at least the inner city ring. I think if that discussion, I'm sure that discussion has been had, but if we're lacking infrastructure, there's no better time to do it than put it in with a collection bid. Say as part of it, you've got to build a MRF, and let them price it accordingly.
We transport our recyclables really far.
So thinking about some of these opportunities you all have mentioned, the city hauling to Ivy, opportunities for infrastructure with the restaurants, education. I bet we've heard the word education more than we've heard the word trash as we've talked to people. That is a real consensus. Schools, the jointly owned MRF. As you think about those opportunities, what do you as a committee need to know to seriously consider those opportunities? What do you need us to find out?
For something like the MRF, I think we need to know really, if we were to invest in something like that, what would the likely participation be? I think that, you know, we do really well with drop-off because we're tapping into highly motivated recyclers, people who are very committed and generally, you know, pretty good at it. When you open it up to curbside, you open up to a population who, a lot of wish cycling going on. And so we know that people will say, yes, I want to do this, but their behavior often doesn't match the aspiration. So I think really getting a good feel for what would the participation rate be, you know, and how much would that shift the economics of what we're doing. I think that would, you know, in my mind, for the infrastructure piece, that would be really important to know.
I just want to, I know this is a 15-year-old study now, but we did look at the joint MRF pretty significantly for that 2007 solid waste plan that we developed. And I can remember going to city council chambers to see the presentation on the joint MRF. I don't know if any of that information is applicable now. But I just wanted to mention it as I remember attending that.
I just want to add that we've also talked a little bit in our committee about pay as you throw. Because I see in the city survey that obviously their whole system is different, but you're looking for ways, you're asking if people would be willing to pay $10 or $20 a month to do organics recycling or yard waste recycling. And in the county, you can throw away as much trash as you like. You can have 5 bins on the curb and pay the same monthly fee as your neighbor who has 1 bin at the curb for trash. So we've talked a lot about how can you get the urban ring, which can mostly afford the curbside recycling and curbside trash pickup, to shift and think about diversion and make the recycling or the composting free or very, very low cost, and make the trash throwing the more expensive thing. I just wanted to raise that.
I have a question. Teddy, as a Dillon Rule state, can we do pay as you throw?
Teddy had to leave the call.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately.
The question is, can a county do pay as you throw?
Yeah, we're a Dillon Rule state. I don't know if that has the state, do they allow that?
Oh yes, I'm familiar.
You mean for private haulers?
The shortest thing is that if the county is the provider, they can do so through a service district. And I believe that they can, the rates that are charged to their customers, I think they can charge different prices for different service levels, which is what pay as you throw, of course, means at its heart. You're right that the city does have a lot more leeway in how it conducts business as a service provider than a county does. You also have a lot of limitations on how the county can quote unquote take over service in Virginia without giving a summary of a thesis. It isn't just something you can just decide to do. You are talking about more like creating a service district, or you can also, through county laws, you can regulate collectors as businesses. Fairfax County, the one I'm the most familiar with, and Loudoun County also, but there, you can basically say, in order to operate a solid waste business in this county, you have to do X, Y, and Z. This is something I've found that a lot of counties in Virginia actually aren't familiar that they have this power. And it's a way to ensure a base level of service for anyone who is doing a service. So it's a very useful tool to do with regulation and policy instead of thinking you have to take on a business. So, and this is the kind of things that we'll talk about for the county would be part of that step 2. Step 1 is focus on the vision. And step 2 is how is that going to happen? But I'm also always happy to answer any questions about that for you guys.
Our county attorney has discussed that with us, and they have researched that to some extent. So just an FYI, and my understanding is that if we do the service district, we are unable to exclude other haulers without paying them the 2 years of lost income. I'm sure you know more about that than I do, Kate, but that was what I was told several years ago when we talked about service districts.
That part is new to me, and I appreciate you telling me about it, and I'm going to look it up.
Okay, well, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but that's what I have been told. Anyway, under Governor Allen, I believe it was,
okay,
or Rob, I always forget which one, but anyway.
The ones I'm most familiar with, and maybe that's the disconnect, is when there was no one doing it to begin with. So technically no one was displaced. Some of these service districts are very old. They're from the initial suburbanization when it was like, oh, a lot of people live here now and there's no one to pick up the trash. So the counties had to kind of step up. If someone was being displaced, that would be a different function, and I want to learn more about that. So thank you for sharing.
Is there a way for more, I'm not sure what the appropriate term is, but basically like for apartment buildings and things like that, is there a way for us to require those to do composting and or recycling, or is that something outside the?
There are counties with requirements for apartments to provide those services to their residents. There are two ways of approaching it regulatorily. One would be just like they make them have so many parking spaces and so many setbacks and so many trees on the property, they can require you have to have this much capacity for recycling compared to how much trash, or it has to be this few feet away from points of entry, lots of detail depending on how much detail you want to go into. And then again, as I said, regulating the haulers. If you're providing trash service through a dumpster or a cart on a regular basis, you also have to provide recycling. You can't sell, and it can't be, well, it's this much for one and this much for the other. It's, if you sell it, it's the whole thing. And so that's one regulatory approach. So it can come from either side. And those examples are things that do exist in other Virginia localities, just for reference.
Okay, and then I guess my follow-up question to that would be, and I don't know if you know this or someone else on SWAAC knows, but like, do we know how much percentage of our solid waste comes from like single household versus apartments type stuff? I'm sure it's skewed a lot different in the county than it is in the city, but.
I don't think they have that data, but it is easy to, not easy, but it is possible to project because all the pieces are there for doing the math.
That is super relevant for Crozet too, with the growth in Crozet and the growth of multi-family housing. I think that's a super relevant question, Navar, for the county.
Multifamily is of growing importance for several reasons with a lot of our clients. It's increasingly, it's what new housing is. That's what's getting filled in the nooks and crannies is multifamily. And also it's kind of been kicked down the road for decades, and single family suburban households and families in cities, there's a high level engagement. So apartments and condos have got to be looped in and brought in. They are very difficult, but we can't wait anymore.
Yeah, if you don't have code to require recycling when the building's built, it's really hard to do it retroactively because they usually don't have the space or the infrastructure.
That used to be most of my job at Fairfax County.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I'm very sensitive of time, guys. So I think we should probably move to the next question, if that's okay, Rachel.
I appreciate that. And
can I give like two, I guess, just two quick answers to two? What are the costs? I mean, we need to know what the costs are. I think that's pretty
I think that's it.
obvious. And then the sort of the not only any potential legal limitations, but also what kind of agreements would it take between the jurisdictions to implement those types of things? So thanks for taking this. Please move ahead.
No, thank you very much. I know people are starting to drop off the call because we have now kept you 30 minutes extra. We appreciate your staying engaged. The last question clearly is a big one. What do we gain by working together? How do we leverage the synergy of the city and the county currently working with GBB? What are the potential gains there?
Lower costs and higher diversion.
Nicely said, Margaret.
That was beautifully summed up.
Such a shared, obviously the fact that it's a very fluid boundary between the two, and we have people that go across both. So there's a real shared interest in the data that will inform, the city program, our vision, and however we think we're going to execute that vision.
And also maybe a unified message about, I think that there's a lot of confusion about what can and cannot be recycled. I know out in the county, we have county waste, but they don't communicate when there are changes to what can be recycled and how people should properly recycle. But I think if you had a unified message that you could amplify out to the entire community, that would be more effective.
Tom, at one point you looked like you had a comment.
Who was that to, Rachel?
To Tom Baker. At one point he unmuted, but I don't think I gave him the opportunity.
I was on the last question still, but to me, it's, I feel like we focus a lot on the residential piece, and to me, it's always been the commercial businesses that were the biggest opportunities for volume. So, you know, how much opportunity do we have in each of those sectors? If that information becomes available, I think that would be great, so that we can focus where we want to spend our attention as well.
Great, thank you. And Terry just put in the comments, what are the businesses really willing to pay for composting, organics, et cetera? Holly, I want to make sure you can grab that for the notes as well.
Tom, that is an awesome comment, because commercial waste generation is usually twice residential. And, you know, I've had lots of comments from business owners that it's just too expensive, like, to actually implement recycling here. And I don't think we have much line of sight on what's happening with commercial businesses in the county, or at least I don't know. I think that's a real unknown area, and one that I think an area where we could get a lot of impact. We don't know that much, and I think we would also need guidance on what could actually be done and what would be most helpful.
Yeah, and it's just a cost of doing business. They pass it along, but you know, if we decide that that's a goal and where we want to go, then we've got to start pushing it that direction. So I just think that's a bigger opportunity.
I want to say thank you to all of you for your time and your input tonight. And also note that Lance and Phil and others have our contact information. And so as you think of other things that we need to be considering, something that we didn't ask you tonight, or you just didn't get the chance to say, or you thought of it at 3 o'clock in the morning, shoot us an email or call us. We want to gather all of your feedback, all of your input, so that we can provide to GBB the best possible information. So please do stay in touch with us if you think of something else. And to those of you that we'll talk to again soon, we look forward to it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I called you Betsy earlier, Rachel. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. I've been called worse.
All right. Thank you all so much, and appreciate everybody staying on a little bit longer. So with that, we'll wrap it up, guys. Thanks.
Say one more thing. We have the signs and all the top loaders out at Ivy. So if you haven't been out there, it's great. Bye.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.